Broadcasting from the world headquarters of the National Floor Safety Institute is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzie.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzie. Thanks for listening to my podcast. When we talk about slips, trips, and falls, we oftentimes kind of see two sides of the story. There's the safety prevention side that's usually headed up by a safety professional, risk manager, someone that's a trained professional in the area of safety, or the backside, which is litigation, some type of a lawsuit or event that took place that might involve an insurance claim or some type of a payment, a settlement. But what we oftentimes don't take into account is the people on the front lines, the people that are working each and every day on the floor to prevent slips, trips, and falls. And today's guest is Steve Spencer, formerly with State Farm Insurance. Steve was the facility specialist with State Farm for how many years, Steve?
22
years. And part of what Steve did was play a really vital role in preventing slips and falls. In fact, some people think that the janitorial staff can play a bigger role in preventing slips and falls than the safety staff. Why? Because, they're on the floor all the time. They're upkeeping the floor, they're maintaining the floor, they're inspecting the floor, they're buying the cleaning agents and floor mats and all the equipment that deal with floor maintenance, much of which directly affects slips and falls. So, Steve, tell the audience what you did for 22 years at State Farm.
Well, Russ, originally when I was hired because State Farm had about 35 million square feet of facilities in the United States and Canada. And they hired me as a specialist to take care of their cleaning. They were outsourcing all of their cleaning all over the country, and they were having some difficulties keeping the buildings clean, and they wanted someone to kind of hit ramrod that thing. And as I started doing that and doing, contracting out with different facilities across the country, I realized, the State Farm realized, hey, we may need to do this on a larger scale, because what's happening is you're finding places where we're having problems with cleaning and falls and things that can be changed if we design it into the buildings. So then I went into the design department. I was a aspect of the design team. I actually helped I specified the type of flooring that would go on the floors, the type of carpeting, the installation of those things, and the maintenance of them, the cleaning. So I also did research on proper chemicals to be used. It didn't leave residue, things of that nature. So that's what happened. I became the in-house expert on how do we make sure that our floors, because there's two things that could cause falls in my mind. One is the actual floor surface that people are walking on, and the other thing are the people themselves. And so what we did is we created an awareness of people that they need to be careful what they're doing. I worked with the safety folks on that, but then I started making sure that any flooring that we put in was a non-slip surface, or a surface that was not going to create a slip and fall, and also the chemicals that we put down, whether it be a finish or a cleaner or whatever, that make sure that after it was cleaned that they still met a high coefficient of friction.
Now, to that point, how did you go about, or the specifiers, how did they go about specifying specific products as it relates to coefficient of friction? Did you find that troublesome, meaning it was hard to get that information from the manufacturers, the suppliers of floors? Was that difficult?
Matter of fact, it was non-existent at the time. When I first started, it was non-existent. That's what kind of led me to the National Floor Safety Institute. I done some research, some reading, and found out that the National Floor Safety Institute was there, got involved with that organization as a representative of State Farm, and found out, hey, there is a way to tell. And so from that, working with the NFSI, and with the manufacturers, we started seeing the manufacturers testing their own products and getting an NFSI safety certification, things of that nature, which made it easier for an end user like State Farm, with people all over the United States, to be able to just hone in on, is it NFSI approved? And
Right.
so that's where we went with it.
Were you finding pushback from manufacturers or confusion? Or, I mean, for example, how would a company know just how safe their floors were prior to those NFSI ANSI standards? And how did you know, as a person who was responsible for assisting the specification of floors? What was your procedure?
Oh, well, first of all, I work for State Farm Insurance, and they're a big dog in the game. You know, when you got 30 million square foot of buildings, and that means flooring, a lot of people listen because they want you to buy their product or specify their product to the cleaning contractors. And so they would listen. And I happened to have my own tribometer at the time. And I told them, I said, we're not going to specify, I told the contractors, because that's who cleaned our building. And I told them, you're not going to use any chemicals in here unless they've been tested by the manufacturer to a safety standard or my standard. And so I actually tested, they would use the product the way it was supposed to be used. And I tested on the floor in that building and say, okay, this product's okay for you to use. If you change, let me know. We're going to have to test it before you can use it again.
Right. So you actually did your own in-house testing of products before they were selected. But, in the case of, say, you're putting in a new, floor at a new building, and you reach out to a manufacturer requesting, for example, that they test to, one of the ANSI, or I should say NFSI ANSI B101 standards. What would they say to you? What was the feedback from the manufacturer when you actually requested them to provide that data to you for the selection process?
There was a little pushback at first because they weren't familiar. They didn't know. It was a new area for them. But I just, very gently told them, I need this. If you can't test it, then somebody else has a product that is tested, then we'll go after that one. But otherwise, we'll test it ourselves before we let it be put in the building. Now, the thing is, a lot of the floor surfaces, some of the flooring needs to be, it all needs to be cleaned, but some of it needs floor finish. So first thing I did is I told our designers, don't specify anything that requires floor finish, because there's just too much variation there, and it's not going to work. Whereas there were some cleaners already have been tested by the NFSI. Evidently, there was easier to get to people who have cleaning agents that are going in. And as I would learn through the NFSI, most of that, the slipperiness of a floor was caused by deodorants, deodorizers, et cetera, fragrances that they would put in the product. So it was easy to look for products that didn't have any kind of scent to them. And so, once again, we would test it when we use the product on the floor. And yeah, I got a lot of pushback at first, both from the designers and from the cleaning contractors that we used. But I kept after and I said, hey, this is what's going to happen. And matter of fact, we're going to use that in our construction even. And so our contract administrators in the construction business would build things like swimming pools, or we had a swimming pool at State Farm. They also would have parking decks. And I had construction administrators telling the contractor, you will test this parking deck to make sure it meets a certain coefficient of friction when it's wet. So it's kind of caught on. We didn't have any major injury or anything, although we did have a case in Florida where an employee was walking in. It was raining one day, and they were walking in, and they from the parking lot, and they had painted on the concrete that where the walkways and stuff in yellow so that people could walk into the building. And she slipped and fell and sued our facility because the paint she claimed was slippery. And that's why she fell and she hurt herself. And I got a phone call from that office, and I said, well, first thing I want you to do is call. I gave him a name of one of the NFSI certified auditors. And I said, call this guy and have him come down and test your parking lot paint stripes. And so he did, came back that it was a high traction product. It was not the cause of the accident. We've eliminated that. The lawsuit was dropped immediately. So that incident kind of started knocking the pins down. Everyone realized, hey, there's value here, value from a financial standpoint. Not just our employees slipping and falling, but now we've got one. Hey, we can protect ourselves from people trying to sue us.
Well, you've been a proponent of this approach, Steve, for many years. In fact, you are a walkway auditor.
Yes, I am.
Certificate holder. You were a part of and I guess still are a part of the process of educating in this subject. You were a trainer, as I was for many years with the NFSI, and actually trained hundreds of people that are today walkway auditors. So this is kind of a message, a gospel, so to speak, that you've been preaching for a number of years and been very instrumental in the development of the ANSI NFSI B101 standards, and again, serve as a member of the board of the NFSI. And so you've been kind of living what you've been preaching for 10, 12, 15 years? I forgot how long I've known you. Seems like forever.
Yeah, I think I actually hit on the NFSI early in my career with State Farm in the mid to late 90s. And it hit me because everyone has a personal interest in slips and falls. And my mother happened to have slipped and fell in a bathtub. And as a consequence, she never fully recovered from that slip and fall. And I knew some other people who were falls had made a huge difference. So it was one of those things I thought, there's got to be a better way. And I'm working for an insurance company, the largest insurance company in the United States. And I said, we should be, aware of that and be letting people know and educating them and as to how to prevent slips and falls, because slips and falls have a major impact on the individual and financially on companies and things of that nature.
So your management supported you. I know that because I worked with you for many years, and I have to tell you, Steve, that's a bit unique. A lot of times, at least in my experience, big companies that have a slip and fall problem tend to, I don't want to say ignore it, but really don't address it. They simply look at the cost of claims, the cost of injuries as, a cost of doing business. They absorb it, ultimately pass that cost along to their customers, or in the case of an insurance company, policyholders, and, shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, not a lot we can do. Where what you did and what your company did, what State Farm did, was really quite unique by way of actually taking a proactive approach in addressing the problem and I guess passing that message along, because I know then and now State Farm still, stop me if I'm wrong, Steve, they carry on the same process of product selection, NFSI approval being a priority, providing independent testing of surfaces in properties to ensure that they're safe. So they really are a very proactive company. In fact, so much so that I remember coming to your headquarters a number of years ago and awarding State Farm the Spirit Award. I think that was 7 or 8 years ago, for really this level of commitment to slip, trip, and fall prevention, which I must tell you is quite refreshing. So now, do the architectural and specification people still kind of carry that on? I'm assuming they did or do.
Yeah, there's still a facilities division, and there's architects there. We're not building as much as they used to in the day, and they've gotten rid of a number of facilities. Their organization structure has changed, but the people who are the people who are engineers, architects, the people who are not in the insurance business, but they're in the facilities arena, and they're trained in the engineering and architecture. They still remember that. They, you know, that was part of the process. They had to take on the gauntlet too. They had to understand it and realize that it was going to be beneficial, because when they build a building, if they're an architect or if they're a construction specialist and they're building a building, they want to make sure that that building is safe for the people going in and going to be using it. So they bought into the program too. And it's because the NFSI had standards, and standards that were concrete, as far as they weren't just saying you shouldn't have slippery floors. They actually gave them a way to test. They gave them a scale of measurement, so they could choose, do I want on the low end of the slip fall, or I want on the high end? And we know that if you're on the low end, you're going to slip, and if you're on the high end, you're going to trip. So they wanted something that was going to be safe for our people and the visitors to our buildings, that was not going to create an issue where a slip and fall may occur, and the consequences of that slip and fall.
Right. Well, you also mentioned, I want to circle back, floor maintenance products, floor cleaning products, or even cleaning equipment. You were very much involved for many years with the International Sanitary Supply Association, or ISSA, as well as, I believe, the IEHA, the International Executive Housekeepers Association. In fact, you were a trainer for them. Am I correct?
Yes.
And that industry also has a vested interest in assuring their customers, meaning manufacturers of cleaning products, cleaning equipment, that their products won't leave a slippery residue, a slippery film. The ISSA and IEHA are today members of the NFSI board, and I know that they have been very active in promoting the same message that you have. But tell the audience a little bit about what's going on in the floor cleaning industry as far as safety goes, from your perspective. I mean, you worked with manufacturers who would come into State Farm to want to sell products as far as cleaning products, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. I mean, cleaning agents, some leave a residue and others don't. But what was your experience with the cleaning industry?
Well, and I did deal with a lot with the manufacturers, and the thing that they understood was everybody always understands the dollar. And one of the benefits of having a product that's certified by the NFSI, or that can be validated as not a cause of slips and falls, is marketable to a company, because they can sell it on a safety standpoint instead of the fragrance or the, what kind of a bottle it comes in, et cetera. Otherwise they're all the same. They can't distinguish themselves as something that's better. And so that's why they kind of, once they got understood what preventing slips and falls would mean to their bottom line, then they came on board, and they were really good about promoting it and doing things through the ISSA, et cetera, to make people aware, their customers aware, that here, you need to use a product like this and use it according to directions. Because before, and many times in that industry, they would just sell the stuff and through a distributor, and they drop it off at the school or whatever building it was, and they would use it. They followed the directions on the label.
Right.
And after that, after they became more aware of it, they realized we've got to educate our end users on how to use these products, because we don't want slips and falls, and we don't want them misusing it, because does not reflect well on us, and actually opens them up in some cases to liability cases,
right?
Lawsuits.
Well, there really wasn't a way years ago to know whether or not a particular floor cleaning agent left the film on the floor or not. It was kind of hit or miss, buyer beware. Of course, in 2006, NFSI published a study on household floor cleaners, and which revealed some interesting information that the majority of household floor cleaning products actually did, in fact, leave a slippery residue behind. So every time you mop the floor, it became shiny, increased the appearance, and also left some form of a fragrance. That deposit that was remaining, that left the shine and fragrance, actually made the floor more slippery. In fact, there was a lot of publicity around that, which ultimately led to, as you know, the release, soon to be released, ANSI NFSI B101.4, I believe it is, standard for floor cleaners. There's now a standard that's going to be out for users and manufacturers to rely upon, which will describe whether or not a cleaning agent will leave a slippery film on a floor or not. And of course, that's as properly used. But that's something that you played a big role in, is really trying to bring to the forefront of not only your company, State Farm, but to the cleaning industry, the new standard, the standard that will establish whether or not a cleaning agent, has, kind of a side effect, kind of like medication. You're taking medication to relieve one illness, but it brings side effects that may actually be worse than the original condition. But how do you see that being received from the floor cleaning industry, the new ANSI standard that should be published either later this year or first part of next year?
I think they'll embrace it because they don't want to cause injury. They really don't want to. They provided products in the past. Most of them did because, hey, people like lemon scent, so we're going to make a cleaner that's lemon scent, or we got a cleaner that really cleans well. I was a sales rep at one time for one of those distributors, and I used to have people come to me and say, well, I've got this floor and I want it shiny. I want to, but it's kind of a brick floor or whatever it is, quarry floor. Well, it doesn't have a natural sheen to it. So they would try to put floor finish on it, which was not a good solution because it would stick in the grout and it would peel off because quarry tile won't hold finish. It just peels off. So I started selling them products that had a little oil in them because I felt, well, that'll leave the oil and it'll keep it nice and shiny. And I came to the realization that it also was slick. So I had firsthand knowledge of actually causing the problem. So I realized then, I said, you need to be aware of what you use on here. And to be honest with you, if you want a shiny floor, buy new floor.
Right.
This quarry tile is not going to give you what you want. And so from before I went to State Farm, I already learned that lesson that, and I worked with our designers and architects and told them, I said, if you want a shiny floor, then you need to pick a floor that's going to be shiny on its own, or you can get a floor finish on it, but you're not going to take a quarry tile floor and make it look like a new penny.
Right. And a quarry tile, for those who don't know, is that kind of orange-red 6-inch by 6-inch tile that's commonly used in kitchens, right? Kitchen environments.
Right. Now, some of them get bigger. They'll get up to 18 inches by 18 inches. But it is a baked brick sort of thing.
Kind of a clay.
Kind of a clay. And so what happens is once it's hardened, it either absorbs really a lot of stuff, and that's bad, or it doesn't absorb anything. And that's what they put the quarry tile in the kitchens for, because it's glazed quarry tile, so it doesn't absorb that grease. You can clean it off.
They put a sealer on it, right? They seal the quarry tile.
So it's, and that's what we started. We also went from that point into telling people who are specifying flooring and manufacturing flooring that you need to be cautious and aware and educated as to what you're putting into a surface, into a building, and what that use of it's going to be. If it's going to be in a kitchen, if it's going to be in a dining room, it's going to be in a restroom, wherever it's going to be, because you have to be aware of what type of environment it's going to be. Kitchen's going to have grease all the time. You can't avoid it. Bathrooms are going to have soap from people washing their hands, etc. That's going to be on the floor. So they have to be aware of those types of things not only in the flooring that they pick for that area, but the cleaning methods that they use and the frequencies for those areas. So, and we always focused on, we need to test, we need to identify so that we know what we're putting down. And if it's a 0.6 static wet coefficient of friction, that's our goal.
Right. Now, you've also stirred the pot, so to speak, when it comes to cleaning floors, specifically with mops, and the difficulty in your experience with mopping grouted tile. Can you explain a little bit about your experience and concerns regarding mopping grouted tile floors?
Well, the cleaning industry for a long time was in I call this the dark ages, because they were using mops, and that mops have been around for hundreds of years. And what happens is mops, you put them down on the floor, and they spread whatever chemicals you have, but they also are supposed to pick up. But in most floors that in kitchens and restrooms, they have grout lines. They have to be grouted down. The grout itself is very absorbent. And the grout line itself is below the face of the tile. So if you take drag a mop across that floor, it's going to hit the edge of the tile, and basically the tile will act like a squeegee and squeegee off not only the detergent and water that's in the mop, but also the soil that's already been picked up by the mop, and it'll leave it in the grout line. And what happens is then the water evaporates out of it, and it leaves a source the next time water hits it for the emulsification of whatever's in that grout line, and it will spread on the floor and become part of a hazard then after you've cleaned the floor. So we made it a standard within State Farm that they would scrub and wet vac all of any grouted tile floor. So you did not leave anything in the grout line that would be activated once water hit it for, during the daily use.
Now, did you use any auto scrubbers or equipment that kind of did that on its own, an auto scrubbing floor cleaner?
We used those auto scrubbers, but in some cases you can't get an auto scrubber in a tight area like some of the restrooms. So what we did is we had them use the scrub and vac process. Now you can accomplish that with there's small scrubbers, but they may not have a vacuum on them. And there's brushes and things that you can use. So basically when we started, there wasn't anything in the marketplace. There is now, but at the time there wasn't. So what we used is, we said, what you do is you start at the back of the restroom and you scrub that floor by hand and back out, and then take a wet vac and walk back in and suck it all up. So as long as it's scrub and vac, I don't care if you can do it by a battery operated machine or by hand, as long as it's scrubbed and wet vac, so that whatever chemical and soil you've loosened from the floor is totally taken away.
Right. One last subject I wanted to speak to you about is one that I know you've spent a lot of time on, and that's floor mats, entranceway floor matting. What's your view of how to use, and if to use, floor matting as an entranceway solution to preventing slips and falls?
I think it's critical, and I call it a walk-off program, okay? And you can use different products in a walk-off program. Matter of fact, when I was at State Farm, we had a lot of pull with the manufacturers of carpeting, because we bought a lot of carpeting. And so I encouraged the manufacturers to build a walk-off tile, which would be, usually it's 18 inches by 18 inches or 24 by 24, but it would go down you could put it down and it would it was designed to hold a lot of dirt and moisture.
Is that like a carpet tile?
It's like a carpet tile, but it's more aggressive, rougher, and designed for absorption as opposed to a regular carpet tile. And so because we found mats work well in some areas. Mats work well in vestibules, but when you bring them in the building and lay them on top of carpeting or on top of another floor, hard surface flooring, they don't get moved and cleaned very often. And so a lot of times they become a source for soil instead of a source for removing soil. But they can be utilized properly if they are, but most end users don't use them properly. Whereas if you build a walk-off area out of carpet tile, walk-off tile, you build a walk-off area, then you can clean it in place. You can extract it, you can vacuum it, whatever you need to do, and you can replace the tiles if you get one that gets damaged.
Right.
And what we found is we were able to, through research and trial and error, we found that we could actually determine, depending upon the environment, because we had facilities in Arizona and Michigan and all over the country. So the soil coming in Michigan is different than the soil coming in Arizona. We got sandy soil, a lot of sand, and it's grit. And down in Arizona, not much rain. Michigan gets a lot of rain and snow.
Right.
They don't get much grit. So then the manufacturers started building their walk-off. We actually had them test the walk-off to show if, how it rated as far as soil absorption and sand absorption. So water and dry soil. So they could, when they're designing it, they can design it for the environment of the area that they're putting it in. But it made a big difference because that way it also made kept the rest of the building cleaner and prevented a lot of potential hazards because it was caught at the door.
Got it. Well, we've been talking to Steve Spencer, formerly with State Farm Insurance. And what are you doing now these days, Steve?
Oh, I'm doing a little consulting on the side. Most of the time, I'm manicuring my lawn and doing things around the house and playing with my grandsons.
Well, as far as consulting goes, how can folks get a hold of you?
Well, they can send me an email at Steve's page, STVSPG @hotmail.com, or they can call me at 309-828-7277.
Wonderful. Well, Steve, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. Really appreciate it, and encourage people that are in your industry or have a need for your expertise to reach out to you. With that, this has been America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzior. I'd like to thank you again for listening to the podcast. And until next time, stay safe. Look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.